Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another You Be the Behavior Consultant. I hope you're doing well this morning. We're going to kind of continue on a trend that we started where we were talking about things that are related to integrity in our field. Our live stream last week really kind of talked about structure and organizational type things, and this time we're going to talk a little bit more about the individual. So I hope you'll find this interesting. It kind of relates to a lot of things, not just the animal training field, but kind of our world in general right now. And so I thought hopefully it would be helpful to people and thinking about not just what we do in animal training, but also in our lives in general. And I see we've got Cynthia here, which is exciting. And hopefully we'll have some more of our regulars joining us in just a moment here. But I don't want to delay. I know everybody's on a schedule, and we'll go ahead and get started. So if you haven't joined us before, this is You Be the Behavior Consultant, a live stream I try to do most Mondays. And this is how it works. We've got a topic that we'll explore. We've got some questions to prompt your participation. And of course, you can participate at any time throughout the entire discussion here. Oh, and we've got PJ here. I'm on vacation. When I saw the topic, I decided to hop on and learn. Well, that's great. I'm glad. I never know if these topics are intriguing to you all or not, but for me, they're things that are on my mind in the moment. And so they inspire me and they help me work out what I'm experiencing or feeling at the moment. And so I hope they're relatable for you all. And again, I always enjoy it when you participate in the discussion. I didn't get into video examples, but I think we got a lot of slides and a lot of things that we can talk about. And of course, we'll recap it all at the end. We try to keep it to an hour so you all have plenty of time to get on with whatever you're doing in your day. So what we're going to talk about today, integrity. And Mary Diaz here today. Wonderful. We are very international. We're going to talk about integrity in animal training, which of course we're going to have to define. To me, it sort of relates to ethics, boundaries, and the choices that we do that shape our profession. And again, I think that you'll find that this is relatable to what's happening in the world as well. So again, I'm encouraging you to think beyond just animal training and hopefully help you relate to how we engage with our world in general. So the first question I have is, what does professional integrity look like? And we're going to get into that a little bit more. When our roles, affiliations, or personal interests intersect with the organizations, the platforms, or public figures we support or participate in. And how can trainers at all levels recognize conflicts of interest or ethical tensions, especially when they're subtle, which I think sometimes is the case for us, normalized, which I also think is sometimes the case for us, or tied to influential people or institutions, and respond in ways that protect long-term professional trust. And when is it appropriate to say no to opportunities, affiliations, or endorsements that may feel beneficial or low risk in the moment, but could compromise professional boundaries, values, or the integrity of our field over time? So there you go. So that's some food for thought to get us started. And of course, like I mentioned at the beginning, we do have to define integrity, because what the heck does that mean? So sort of a layman's definition might be demonstrating honesty, which of course we would want to operationalize as well, and strong moral principles. Again, what does that mean? Which might, come down to things like consistency between our values, our words, our actions. Do we do what we say? And if we want to take that a step further, professional integrity, we're upholding some ethical standards that, again, we would have to define in our field. And those standards that are very specific to what we do. And again, that might include some honesty, we do what we say, some accountability, respect for others' work. We talk about that a lot here on this platform. And I think a really big important one is prioritizing the collective good over personal gain. And I think we, in the animal industry, that's kind of a big deal. Especially because we're talking about animal welfare, so that, we tend to think of this as a helping profession. And then Stephanie's here as well. So hello, Stephanie. So to break that down a little bit more, integrity requires alignment between what we say we value, and again, we have to identify those values, and how we actually behave. What do we do? Do our actions support what we say we value? And especially when we're asked to test those values, when those things are brought into question by maybe, hey, will you do this thing? And you have to say, oh, will I do that thing? So professional integrity includes transparency about conflicts of interest. And that might be one of those situations where maybe somebody says, hey, I'm going to give you a lot of money if you'll question those values. Proper attribution of others' work. We talk about that a lot here. And respect for institutional boundaries. Integrity is tested most when personal benefit conflicts with professional obligations or when convenient choices violate stated principles. And in animal training, professional integrity extends to how we treat our colleagues, our mentors, our organizations, our animals. And I think this is a big one that we talk a lot about here, the field's collective knowledge base. So we'll kind of get into these a little bit deeper as we discuss some of these in more detail. So again, we're trying to define what are the things that we think are important in terms of the behaviors that we do that would demonstrate integrity. And these might not be things that we actually have put into words before. We sort of think, yeah, those are important, but maybe we haven't talked about them in great detail before. And I think that's what got me on this pathway. I think as a person who's quite heavily involved in disseminating information, has been involved in trade organizations, I feel like that word's always in the back of my head, integrity, but then I started thinking, well, what does that mean to me? What does it mean to others? Maybe there needs to be some more definition about that. And again, tying in with that, it means it's more than good intentions. I mean, I think we all tend to feel like we're trying to do the right thing and that we have good intentions. A lot of us that are here is because we care so much about animal training. We care so much about the field. We care so much about what happens to animals. So we do have really good intentions, but what does that look like? So it means we have to have more than good intentions or believing that we're doing the right thing. We have to know what those things are and really having an awareness of the consequences of what we do, even if we didn't mean to do something that was unintentionally harmful. And if we did, we have to take responsibility for that impact. I think that's where coming back to those times where maybe we were using outdated information and recognized, oh, there's a better way now, that we say, oh, you know what? I've learned better strategies, better procedures, better methods, better information, owning that and saying, I've learned some new information and here's what I've moved on to. And I want to make sure I'm creating some awareness around that. And then also understanding what a conflict of interest is and recognizing that competing loyalties may compromise objective judgment. So if you're really committed to, I just love this guru, for example, and that I'm so in love with the guru that it's making me have difficulties accepting new procedures. That could be a challenge, right? You're getting so much positive reinforcement for being a part of a community that it's making it difficult for you to accept a new procedure. That can be something that is, one of those challenges for you. Peaches says, oh, I'm definitely going to have to talk to you more about this tomorrow in the Tower Talk. I had this same epiphany this past month. I know, that's why I love workshopping these topics. For me, they're very helpful as well to think about, like, why am I experiencing this like emotional feeling, right? So we know emotions are the results, are contingency descriptors. They tell us about what's going on in the environment, these consequences that are happening. The emotions are telling us about what's happening in our world right now. And so when you're having that turmoil, you start going, oh, what's going on right here? Am I struggling with, my loyalty to this person, but I'm really excited about this new topic. So, again, this is kind of why we're workshopping all this stuff here, so you can think about it more. But yeah, well, I'd love to talk about this more tomorrow in our Tower Talk. And yes, we do have a Tower Talk tomorrow for members. Okay. So we also know that power and influence dynamics affects others, right? So again, this is something I have to think about as somebody who's, I'm platforming myself, right? I'm out there on YouTube and you guys are listening to this. So I have to be aware of how that impacts what other people are thinking, seeing, doing. And again, not meaning harm doesn't erase harm. So we have to be aware of that. And again, that's why I'm comfortable saying, I don't know, or things that I did in the past are different from what I do moving forward. And I also have on my own website some information about like even the content that you are learning from that was maybe created just a couple years ago. Remember that new content coming out may say, try it this way instead of what you learned from this course just a few years ago. So we're always trying to be cognizant that information is constantly evolving, especially when we're working with evidence-based type resources, being that we are the behavior analytic field is one that is trying to be one that uses the scientific method and changes based on what new evidence comes out. So again, that's being honest about our limitations. So again, this is what I know now, and this is the information I'm sharing based on what I know now, and that may change in the years to come. What the motivations are and the potential biases. We've done a lot on confirmation bias, so trying to be aware of, this is the information I have available to me now, and that may change with information that I have available down the road. And so this is impacting the information that's coming out at this time. Okay, so looking a little bit more. So why does it matter in animal training? This might be pretty easy for a lot of us, but we're becoming a more visible field. I think in recent years, obviously, we see a lot of information on the internet. It tends to be, I think, more professional, right? We're trying to be more evidence-based. And obviously there's financial gains in this field. And so there is a greater ethical responsibility. It does impact the animals. It does impact our clients. It's also impacting our colleagues as well as the public. Obviously, the public can look at all this as well. So we do have a responsibility to behave in a way, in my opinion, that is with integrity, since we've tried to define that now. And so that means our quality of training and care standards are all impacted by this. It has an effect in a big pool. So yeah, I think that's a little bit of a no-brainer. But it also impacts our professional trust with our consistent ethical behavior. And I think when we have a violation, it can damage a lot of relationships. And that public credibility can really have an impact on our entire field. I think we've seen that in the past, especially with some of the training techniques that are quite heavy-handed, that I think most of the people that are on this platform would, tend to be away from that community. We're distanced from that community. But we have seen the fallout from that kind of impact. So an individual that may be tied to that kind of stuff. So I would say that ethical failures rarely happen in isolation, right? They tend to impact many people. So it can impact certainly an individual, but it may impact the field. It may impact organizations that somebody's affiliated with. It may impact personal relationships with others. So I think there's a bigger responsibility than just to that one individual. And so there's value in really thinking about what your practices are. And we're going to talk more about some of these very specific things that we want to be thinking about. So let's talk a little bit about core principles. So again, we've talked about consistent alignment between what our values are and what we do, particularly when it comes to our personal gains and professional obligations. And we'll get into that a little bit later. And again, another big one is that transparency when it comes to proper attribution and respect for intellectual property. We've done a whole lot about plagiarism on this platform and really getting into the weeds as to what plagiarism looks like in a lot of different ways in our field. And I don't think I'm going to spend a lot of time on that here because we've got a really great resource on that. And that one is freely available. It's the one about freeing crabs from the bucket. And so that goes into a lot more detail about what plagiarism looks like and how to properly provide attribution for a lot of different things, not just, a written thing, but it can be as simple as a behavior idea that I think our field has been really kind of loosey-goosey about, and we could be a lot better about providing attribution to so many people in our field. I think it's just a really great practice to get into. And I think we also have to think about these people that have been great mentors to us. I often mention how Joe Lang and Paul Andranis and Jesus Rosales Ruiz have been really great folks in terms of shaping the information that I share with you all, especially in the last decade. And I think it's really important to acknowledge what they have contributed to our community, even though we may not see them as animal trainers. Their scientific knowledge has been incredibly important in shaping what's been happening moving forward in our field. And so we can't dismiss those and just go, oh, it's mine now. This is my information. We may be doing really great work in trying to apply what they've taught us in new communities or with new species. But it's really important to give credit to those folks that really had important impact on us, and not erasing their impact. So I did mention a little bit before that conflict of interest stuff. So if we're involved with trade organizations in any way, whether you're like on a committee or on a board, that really kind of elevates the responsibility to a bit of a higher ethical standard. And the reason is that person is essentially a fiduciary. That means you are acting as a representative for a whole group of people. You're serving their collective professional interests. And so that's a big deal, right? And, if you want that sort of, real world kind of parallel, this is where we think about politicians, right? So that person really has to think beyond their own personal interests. They have to think about, what I'm doing here is for the collective good for everybody in this field. And so what do all these people need that is in the best interest of their good? And so it's not for you, it's for them. You're just the representative. And so this means we have to have really clear boundaries between what you're doing for that organization or the community or the field and the individual's private commercial interests. And so I'm really fortunate in that, having had opportunities to work in different disciplines, so sometimes I speak at veterinary conferences, and I find that they have really well developed, what would I describe it? Just policies. And so like when you sign a contract to speak at some of these big veterinary events, it's so well laid out in terms of what is allowed and what's not allowed, especially when it comes to like a conflict of interest type of thing. Also with like the Association of Behavior Analysis International, which again is a quite large organization, it's made quite clear so that the boundaries are clear. I feel like that's still a little fuzzy in the animal world, in the animal training world. And so in my personal experience, I observe that line crossed a bit more in the animal training world, and I wish we would elevate the criteria and the boundaries there and uphold them and hold people accountable when we see those lines crossed and say that's not okay. So some things to consider in our field. So we do see that it can be a challenge when somebody is holding multiple roles with competing interests. So when that happens, but again, if the boundaries are there, if the accountability is there and it's defined properly, it doesn't have to be an issue, but we just have to define that. And so it can appear as perceived problems, even if they haven't done anything wrong, if there isn't those guardrails in place. And so we have to be careful about that leveraging that credibility, that institutional credibility that's given by that trade organization for private gain, even, especially if the guardrails aren't there. So it's just one of those things that you have to be really careful about. So things that I look for is like, is that person's logo or brand being allowed to be splashed all over the place? We understand that like it's okay to have your your company's logo on your slide, or contact information on the last slide. But if they're continually advertising throughout their entire presentation, like come to my workshop, or you can get more, if you were to join my program, those are violations. You shouldn't be allowed to advertise during your presentations. It shouldn't be that that like if there's an educational program that's offered by a trade organization, it should be branded the trade organizations. It shouldn't be branded by an individual or an instructor in the program. It should be branded the trade organizations. So things like that are the types of things that I would be looking out for going. And again, it's really easy for someone like me to spot that, because as a private individual, I'd be like, well, if I did that, I would be dinged. Somebody would be saying, why is she getting to promote her private company via this trade organization? I would see that as a conflict of interest. Someone else would see that as a conflict of interest if it was me. So why would that person be allowed to do that? So those are the kind of things that typically would not be okay, which I do see happen in our industry at times. So it's one of those things that jumps out at me. So other things that, we would want to be aware of is like if there was parallel certification. So you can't offer a certification through a trade organization and then duplicate that. Like I couldn't duplicate that as my own private one, and saying, like, here, I'll do the same product for the trade organization, and then you can also get it through me, because that sort of undermines the certification integrity of both, to be quite honest. And again, I couldn't take my access as a like say a committee member to information and then use that for my own private benefit. So that would be like access, like we can't, like we just had a discussion about this at a meeting recently where somebody was like, oh, can we email all these people and tell them blah, 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 blah. And the answer was no, that, we don't have access to those emails. That's the trade organization that can contact those people and do something, but that's off limits to us. We don't get that information as committee members. The people that run the executive office can contact them, but we don't get that information. So things like that, there's got to be guardrails there. So again, those are like privacy matters, things like that. So proper disclosure and management of conflicts of interest requires very explicit boundaries. We need to define those. We just can't count on the good intentions of everybody. And I think part of it is that I don't know that everybody has a great awareness of what a conflict of interest is, because it isn't something that everybody has to think about, because a lot of times the people that are serving in those roles, they don't necessarily run businesses or think about what it means to run a business, or think that somebody might consider taking advantage of those opportunities. So it just doesn't come up to them. And so that is one of the things that I try to remind people as somebody who serves on these committees, that we have to be aware of those things. We certainly hope that nobody would ever do that, but unfortunately, I think it does happen. And that's why those, in many of those organizations that I have been fortunate to participate in, I see those guardrails and I think, oh, I'm so glad they have that. It's very smart to have those things. Okay, so let's get back to attribution and why that's so important, and why it demonstrates integrity. We're looking at saying your work, or that whoever's being given attribution, informed this development and teaching. And we have said many times here that scientific lineage matters. And of course, not even just scientific in our community. I think the practical application lineage matters as well. We are a very applied world here in animal training, and I think that counts for a lot as well. So when we credit those foundational scholars, we're preserving the integrity of knowledge development. I think that's huge. I think that's really important in our community. So one of the things we're seeing, at least in my experience, is what's described as appropriation, right? Somebody adopts a concept that they may have previously dismissed, only after others did all the foundational work. And maybe they pushed really hard to get that information to be adopted by the animal training community, and now they're kind of taking it, but they're forgetting to credit people. We did a whole live stream on the unsung heroes of negative reinforcement, because that was one of the things that came up in because of some information that was being put out there that basically disregarded all the great work that some others had done to get negative reinforcement acknowledged as a really important procedure or tool, acknowledging it as a functional reinforcer, and then acknowledging that the procedure can be applied in a way that is, we might describe as beneficial to the animal. And so I think that's happening, unfortunately, in our world. And so I think it's important to have our antenna, our radar up for that, so that we acknowledge that that's an issue and we can call it out as individuals. Let's see if I have another comment here. Another thing, using intermediaries or institutional affiliations to legitimize appropriation without direct attribution represents ethical misconduct. That's a big mouthful, but it's basically kind of saying, can I borrow somebody else or an affiliation to say, hey, man, I'm legit, or I don't have to, or this is legit, I don't have to credit that person. And so I think the example that kind of came to mind for me is like, let's say, rest her soul, but let's say you got a photo op with Jane Goodall. Does that automatically give you legitimacy? Or like I've had someone photobomb me just to kind of say they had a photo with me. Or what about the hero shots where somebody takes a photo with like a giraffe or a dolphin that was like an opportunity that anybody could get, if they pay their money to do a public feeding with a giraffe or have a dolphin experience, and then use that as sort of legitimizing their experience as a giraffe trainer or a dolphin trainer, but they don't really technically do any practical application with those species. So to me, they're sort of, misrepresenting their experiences or their knowledge or information. So those are things that we kind of keep an eye out for. And again, what about extracting value from shared knowledge for private commercial benefit without attribution, and how that betrays everybody's trust? And again, I think this is where we go back to that, right now there's a lot of excitement about the constructional approach, and so more people are getting excited about it, which definitely is something we want. We want more people to be excited about the constructional approach, and certainly those are opportunities for people who are disseminating to potentially make some money from that. But I think the important thing is making sure that the attribution is there and acknowledging where that information came from. And again, also providing links and information back to where did you get that information? Who taught you, and preferably the original resources. So if you're on my platform, you know that I provide a lot of links to papers that you can download, links to other instructors and resources where you can learn more about the constructional approach, and people that are teaching it in the animal community, and also with human learners as well. So we try to be really clear about that this isn't all stuff that comes out of my head, for sure. Now, what I contribute is just how to apply it with in the zoo community. So remember that plagiarism does not includes not only direct copying, but also presenting others' frameworks, methodologies, or course structures as your own original work. So again, I would say that plagiarism course is really helpful in kind of really diving deep into all that. All right, so more stuff. And again, this may kind of help you relate to stuff that's happening in the real world outside of animal training. I always think of like animal training as like its own little government and political community. So professional alignment with individuals or organizations is not a neutral act, right? It does signal your values. So I always think about that as well too. Who do you collaborate with? Who do you platform? Who do you publicly support? Basically affects who is amplified and who may not be getting heard. And so that's something to think about. And aligning with those who have suppressed, discredited, or appropriated others' work reinforces those behaviors. And again, this is kind of goes back to in the beginning where I said that sometimes things might be a little bit subtle. And I think that is some of those things are kind of the more subtle things that we see happening that actually do impact the entire industry. And they may be sort of less aware, or something that we don't see so much, or people may be less aware of that that's what's going on. But it may cause people to think and go, oh, is this alignment one that I feel really good about, or is this one giving me sort of a like funky feeling? And why? Analyze those contingencies. What are the contingencies going on there that may make you go, I wonder about that? And that may give you some information. So again, silence or neutrality when aware of those unethical behaviors or not. Sometimes we don't know and it takes investigation. Does tend to function as endorsement. And so that is a challenge, I think, in our industry. And of course, association with those unethical practices could potentially have fallback on one's own credibility. And so those sometimes cause us to have really difficult conversations with ourselves. What do we, where do we want to spend our time? And so that may mean having to decline really attractive opportunities or distancing ourselves from influential figures. And I will say that I've certainly done that. I've had to draw the line for myself in being involved in certain situations or with certain individuals because I just felt like this does me more harm than good. And chose communities where I felt like, this is a place where I feel like the integrity is there, and I felt like that's a better place for me to spend my time. And again, I think you could probably connect this to stuff that's happening in the world as well. And those are hard decisions sometimes, right? Again, if we look at the contingencies, there could be some really tempting positive reinforcement there that makes you want to stay if you do that cost benefit analysis. But then sometimes you just have to go, you know what? I got to make a decision here, right? And this is another thing that leads us to the question of, why is that person or community interested in your participation? And I've definitely been in this situation as well. Like, why am I being invited to this? Is it because my name lends credibility to the venture? And if they just want my name, but I'm not really being allowed to voice, my concerns, or I have no decision-making power, then I kind of feel used in that situation. Is my reputation being used to validate something that is, and protect them from criticism? And so they want to be able to say, well, Barbara's on board, so therefore we must be okay, but maybe it's not okay. And maybe they are really getting all the benefit, but I'm not getting anything out of it. So all those things could be really big warning signs for me as to why should I be involved in this particular situation, whatever it may be. So those are things that I think about. And that can be really, especially if you are an established professional, you might be really vulnerable. And that can... let's see, because it could legitimize conflicts of interest, and it can start to blur that line between that private interest and organizational stuff. So like, it could make it legitimate, right? Like if, oh well, you're kind of in both areas, right? Well, and again, for me, like as somebody who's involved in a trade organizations, as well as, I have my own thing, I have to keep those really clear, right? But if somebody says, oh, well, Barbara is this with all these bio credentials, and we slap that on our program that she's going to help teach, it could get really blurry, right? That, and it's validating whatever this program is. So I have to be really careful. Another thing to remember is that, if you're being asked to do sort of that proxy warrior work that we talked about in that one live stream where, we were saying the conflict and toxicity, that's one thing to be aware of. And again, that sometimes integrity requires withdrawing access and saying no or not granting participation. And that can be really hard. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the saying yes or saying no and what that can look like. I have some notes here about examples, so that's why I keep checking over here and making sure that I'm hitting some of those. All right, I think I'm okay. So let's talk about saying yes or no. So I think one of the big challenges is that some of these dilemmas that we get into are often disguised as really great opportunities. And, you might get platformed more, you might get more visibility, there might be a financial gain, you might have more influence or really great professional advancement. And that can be really hard to say no to, right? It's that competing contingencies that we talk about, superimposition, right? But that short-term gain may undermine long-term trust from maybe your whole field or from others that you really value. So accepting opportunities that compromise boundaries can damage your relationships, maybe with a trade organization, maybe with others that are really important to you. So you really have to think about, is this the right thing to do? And it could damage your whole professional reputation that you've built over years by getting involved with this maybe one questionable decision. So saying no can be really hard, but it is a professional skill, and I'd say not a failure, and you don't necessarily always have to give a great explanation as to why. You can just say, it's not a right fit for me, or I don't have time for that right now. Thank you for the offer. Lots of easy ways to say no without having to go into great detail. But I think the important thing about being able to say no is that it preserves your independence, it maintains boundaries, and in some cases it may signal your values if you want to go to that thing. I think for me, I know like being the person that says no isn't always popular, but I've found some situations where in the long run, and I think I have this farther down there, I learned the hard way that it wasn't the popular thing to do, but it was the right thing to do. And I wish I had been firmer in saying no, to be honest. So I won't state the exact companies or anything like that, but I agreed to be on board because the people that were working on the project really, really, really wanted me there. I think they kind of had been led to believe that this was all like just really good for animals, and that's why we're doing this. But it really was a business deal. And basically, the contract was very one-sided towards the company asking them to do the work. And I felt like the people were being taken advantage of, and their intellectual property was basically just being taken away from them. And as somebody who had already been involved in contracts before, I kept saying, this is not a good deal. This is not a good deal. I have an intellectual property lawyer that, he can look at this, but we have to pay him for his time. And even he said, it's not a good deal. But in the long run, we agreed to the contract and with some modification, but I was like the stick in the mud that company ended up hating because I kept modifying the contract, whereas I guess everyone else in that they had dealt with just agreed to the contract, but I kept saying it's a bad contract. And then in the end, I think we probably got paid more money than most people they worked with did. And then recently they were like, we want to revise the contract and buy you all out. And the buyout was not a good deal, but, and we went round and round on that. And in the end, everyone agreed to the buyout to just kind of get rid of having to deal with this company. But for me, the whole thing just felt like this is an unethical company that just wants to take intellectual property from people to make money. They're not, I don't really feel like they want to necessarily, I mean, maybe there's a little bit of I want to help animals, but it was really more about we want to use you to make money. So, this is what I'm saying about like, you really have to be more attentive. It can't, I think a lot of people in the animal business are really of the mindset like we're out here to do good. We just want to do good. But that really good intention stuff can be taken advantage of by people who think more like business people and are like, well, I'm just gonna use that to make money. So you have to be aware that this is out there and that not everybody acts with integrity, especially when it comes to business. And that they got a great lawyer who's going to write a bad contract and coerce a bunch of people into, well, you got to take this or that's it, or you're going to have to spend a lot of money on a lawyer to improve that contract. Your hands can be tied into a bad situation. So. All right, so moving on. Like if you were going to do a credentialing program, remember that the organizational credentials belong to that organization, not to the individual instructors or the brand representative. So, if they position a primary instructor with a private brand as the face of the trade organization certification, that creates like implicit endorsement and sort of uneven playing fields. That gets very muddy. And so this is again where you need to, like I just talked about contracts, this is where you need to have very specific guidelines and terms and everything outlined in a contract. And so that means like if you do part ways, and that other person says, I'm going to create a certification program, it needs to be distinctly different from what the trade organization offers. And that way you're not confusing learners and undermining both certifications. So these are the kinds of things that I think a lot of people don't think about when they're trying to do this great work for animals, that, these are business dealings too. So very important things to think about. So remember that trade organizations require institutional first branding, not individual first promotion that benefits private enterprises. I think that's again, this conflict of interest stuff always has to be in the back of your mind. And so that's why you can't have the same certification program content in both, because it wouldn't make sense. And you can't invite the people that created the trade organization program into your private one, because that is attempting to transfer legitimacy of the private one from the trade organization one. So you're basically collapsing the boundaries. And so that makes, again, sort of a very messy situation there. So these are all the things that I don't think everybody thinks about when we're dealing with all these things. So again, I go back to, we have to be the guardrails. We're not taught this stuff. I was never taught, what does integrity look like in the field of animal training? What are our ethical boundaries? And I don't think something exists that teaches us this. I think the way that most of us are learning it, and the way that I certainly learned it, is through experience, by having experiences with people doing something and going, oh, that doesn't feel good. Or I just got myself into a bad contract, or how come this person is getting free advertising through this trade organization, but they're also sitting on the board or committee? That doesn't feel right. Isn't that wrong? And not really knowing at the time that, oh, that's a conflict of interest, and then going on the journey of what's a conflict of interest. So we learn these ethics through experience, by observing others, making mistakes, and then facing painful consequences. For me, like these bad contracts that I, experienced over the years were big learning lessons to me about read the darn contract, talk to a contract lawyer, protect your intellectual property. So really, the field relies on individuals, especially those sitting in positions of power in trade organizations, to self-regulate and to do the right thing, which I don't know that that's always happening, especially in a lot of our trade organizations are quite young in the field of animal training. So So there's still a lot of learning, I think, going on there. So we do have to, be our own regulators and look at, what policies are in place. Are they being applied? Is there accountability, or are they too weak? Are they absent? Do we need to help hold them up? Do we need to add some teeth to them? What's going on in those situations? So, so we are the guardrails. Like I said, nobody else makes us behave ethically. The responsibility lies within each professional. And so, like I said, the last live stream, we really kind of talked about how systems can create these challenges. But here we are looking a little bit at ourselves as individuals and how we can contribute to adding the integrity and the ethics. So again, when the integrity fails, there's consequences. We lose trust, we lose access to opportunities, and we lose professional relationships, and it may not be that it was intentional, but if we have people that are behaving in ways that are without these things that we're talking about here, we start to go, oh, I don't trust that person. I don't feel like it's safe in that situation. And yes, trade organizations can provide consequences if they have policies in place and if people care about them, if they want to hold people accountable for them. So, and trade organizations are just one, but one situation or circumstances, but we as individuals can still practice a lot of these things that we've been talking about here in terms of behaving in a way that's ethical. So I did want to talk about, though, what happens when somebody does say, you know what, I am going to hold somebody accountable, or I do think it's important that people behave with integrity. I think that when that happens, the person that's saying, hey, I don't think that was okay, or that wasn't right, I think they often get labeled as difficult, or they're being extra emotional or unreasonable. So like I gave an example of that contract. I definitely was the thorn in everyone's side because I kept saying this contract wasn't fair to the people that were contributing content. And it was so funny because there was an email chain, and one of the people on, not one of the authors, but the people on the side of the company accidentally wrote something in the email chain that said how difficult I was, and I saw it. And it obviously wasn't supposed to go to me. They're writing it to their one of their inside staff. But I mean, yeah, I was saying no to a lot of things, but I knew it wasn't a fair contract. So, but that's what it takes sometimes. You stand up for that fairness. So those of us who enforce those ethical consequences may be accused of being unfair when they're actually trying to act with integrity. I was trying to do the right thing for a group of people that were going to do all the work and get very little in return for it, basically have our intellectual property taken from us. And I think the opposite was true in that case. I think integrity was being firm in that case and not anything else, to be, honest. So, but yeah, they didn't like it. They didn't like that they weren't getting what they wanted that easily. So ethics can feel uncomfortable, right? So setting boundaries or declining opportunities may seem harsh, but it serves the long-term professional health of our industry. And I think this is the other thing that is something maybe all of you have experienced at some point or another. The person that's harmed by the unethical behavior may seem shocked or incredulous, not simply angry. And I think that's because sometimes if you're the one that feels like you're acting with integrity, it surprises you when other people don't see it, when they don't see the problems, when they're not seeing like, oh my gosh, how could somebody do that? And again, I ask you to think about what we see going on in the world right now. There are a lot of things that are happening that for some are really incredulous, like how could somebody support that? And I see that also in our own community, like how could somebody do that? How could somebody support that? Why are they not seeing that that's not an okay thing? And then for those who violate ethics, some of them may genuinely not understand why their behavior is problematic. So that's also really fascinating, right? So some of them don't see how that could be a bad thing, right? And so that's the flip side of that discussion. And so it creates this mutual incomprehension of, I'm so upset that they would do this. And the other one going, I don't get it. What's wrong? What's wrong with that? How could that be wrong? So it's very interesting, right, that we have this dilemma. And again, if we look at the contingencies, do that nonlinear contingency analysis, you might find some interesting contingencies that are maintaining both of those responses. So deeper exploration for you and your circumstances if you find yourself on either side of that. So I did want to talk a little bit about suppression, because again, I think this is something we can relate to again in the real world as well. Scientific disagreement ideally is best addressed through evidence and reasoned debate, and ideally not through exclusion or attacks, right? And public dismissal of evidence-based contributions without substantive critique can be perceived as suppression rather than legitimate scientific discourse. So, when somebody just poo-poos something as a fad or a trend, I think that's not really fair either. And we've seen that recently as well. And then removing or excluding people from professional spaces or platforms silences voices, right? And limits those diverse perspectives. And again, think about what's happening in the world today. We're seeing that as well. So I think I've observed that in our communities as well. And so I think about those as things that make it challenging for us to operate with integrity. Obviously, the use of legal action in ways that chill dissenting viewpoints also is an issue that we have to think about. And repeated public dismissal of specific perspectives, especially by influential people, that gets echoed by others, can function to marginalize dissenting viewpoints, even if it's not coordinated. So we have to be aware of that. And then providing platforms to individuals who practice chilling behaviors can undermine confidence in ethical norms and discourage open discourse. So all of those are important things that we have to think about as well. So a lot of stuff there to think about. But with that, I'm going to take us to the recap. And I'm looking at my list here of any examples that I wanted to yeah, I think I covered all my examples that I had. So professional integrity in animal training requires more than good intentions. It demands awareness of consequences, recognition of power dynamics, and understanding that impact matters more than intent. As our field becomes more visible, professionalized, and monetized, ethical responsibility grows correspondingly. Integrity affects animal welfare outcomes, trust between professionals, and public credibility, with ethical failures rippling outward across the field. Who we align with is not neutral. It signals our values and affects whose voices are amplified or silenced. Established professionals must recognize warning signs of being used to legitimize questionable practices and understanding that saying no to attractive but ethically problematic opportunities is a professional skill, not a failure. Trade organizations require strict boundaries between governance and private business interests, as the same certification products cannot ethically be both organizational credentials and privately controlled products. Most practitioners never receive formal ethics education, learning instead through painful experience, making self-regulation essential. When boundaries are enforced, those holding them may be mischaracterized as difficult, when integrity often looks like firmness. Suppression of dissenting views through exclusion, dismissal, or legal mechanisms undermines scientific progress and professional discourse. The field depends on individuals becoming their own guardrails, recognizing that short-term gains from ethical compromises damage long-term trust, relationships, and reputation. Ultimately, professional integrity means accepting that we are accountable for our alignment, choices, and the consequences of our actions on individuals, organizations, animals, and the field's collective advancement. Ooh, sorry. Always hard for me to just read stuff. And as we've mentioned before, I do have a whole roadmap on industry integrity, ethics, and critical thinking. And this is just a bundle of courses that are related to this topic. So if you want to take a deeper dive on it, this also has the plagiarism course that I had mentioned before, and many others that are related to this topic. So if you want to take a deeper dive on all of this stuff, this is a really great roadmap. And this is a new thing that we're offering in Animal Training Fundamentals, where related courses are bundled together to make it a little bit easier to really get into some of these cool topics. And other cool things, our Science into Practice immersion experience is got registration open. If you haven't noticed yet, we tried to make an announcement on that, and we're already filling up, which is really exciting. And again, this one's going to be very limited number of people. Like, I mean, I think we're trying to keep it to something like 10 people, really small. And we already have, I think maybe half full. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, please get to that site. SIPimmersion.com is one way to get there, or you can scan that QR code and you'll get very intimate, hands-on experiences, practical application experiences with some really cool animals at Avian Behavior Conservancy and also at Wild Wonders, which have some amazing animals there. And it's going to be very practical application based, although we will do a bit of lecture as well on some really cool emerging topics. So please join us. And then another important announcement is the Big Cat Seminar is now open for registration, and I hear that one is already getting a lot of registrations as well. This one will have some live training demos with the big cats at Copenhagen Zoo. And again, we will also be talking about emerging strategies and procedures that will really make a difference in your big cat training. And that one is not till May, so you do have some time, but I would say that you want to get on the registration as fast as you can, because that also has limited space, mainly because we can only have so many people moving around to watch the training demo. So definitely get your registration as soon as possible. If you like this one, here is our citation for it. We do appreciate attribution. We're trying to model that as best we can. And also a reminder that we do have fluency certificates that we are offering now. So basically answering questions under a timed condition, so that basically, do you know the information, and how fast can you answer it? So fluency is speed and accuracy is basically what that is. And each quiz is different every single time. So you won't really, memorize the answers. It's all randomized answered, randomized questions. So it's a really cool feature that we now have for members. And this applies to our credentialing program, where we have different bundles of courses that are matched to where you are in your training journey. And it's pretty awesome. You can learn more about it if you go to animaltrainingfundamentals.com credentials. And we hope you will take advantage of that. That's available to all members, so you can take that anytime. And then another thing, if you're a member, we are having a Tower Talk tomorrow. That means members can get together over Zoom, and it's a very informal gathering where you can talk about anything you want, this live stream, your training, challenges. It's very fun. We go down all sorts of rabbit holes and get into really interesting conversations. If you are not a member, you can go to animaltrainingfundamentals.com. We have a monthly individual option, which you can cancel at any time. We have the annual individual, which is a 20% savings. And then our best deal is the facility annual, where you can have up to 200 sub-accounts, each with their own credentials, their own opportunity to earn badges. You follow all your own tracks, and that is definitely our best deal. And if that is just too fancy for you, we do have a YouTube membership where you get access to a number of videos, but it's not as structured, but you do get access to quite a bit of stuff. All right, there you go. That was it. A thinker for you this time. Hopefully gave you some food for thought. And then Annetta says she's sorry she came in late. I will definitely watch this live stream recording tomorrow. Yeah, this one obviously is one you could certainly listen to if you're a commuter or something like that and you need something in the background. But again, hopefully something to think about and maybe help you wrap your brain around all sorts of things that are going on in the world and lots of systems, I mean, and again, like I said, it helps me to put these together when I'm trying to sort out things that are going on in the world, also in animal training. And, they're little tangents, but we have lots of different topics we can always cover, and we'll get back to some practical application stuff again soon. Don't worry. This one just popped up for me, and I wanted to get it out. It's kind of like these live streams are, for any of you that do anything creative, whether it's art or writing, sometimes these live streams are like that. Sometimes you just have to do the thing that's right there on your mind. And so this is the one that had to come out this week. So, all right, with that, I'm going to let you all go. We are right at the top of the hour here. I hope you have a great day, and we'll look forward to seeing